One welfare is a concept that recognizes the interconnectedness between people, animals, and the environment. It acknowledges that the well-being of one is connected to and impacted by the well-being of others. We spoke with Dr. Magdalena Smrdelj, Chief Veterinary Officer with the Ontario SPCA, to explore One Welfare and humane education further. So I understand that you're making a connection between One Welfare, animal ethics, and humane education. So can you tell me a little bit about the concept of One Welfare?
Sure, Callie. One Welfare is a very holistic way of looking at things, and what it does is it's a concept that says that animal health, human health, and the environmental well-being are all very closely interconnected. And so the first way of visualizing it, folks used to do a diagram where they showed 3 separate circles, so that each of them represented each area, human, animal, and the environment, with little itty-bitty places where they intersected. And as we've been making more connections between human health and animal health and the environmental health, we've noticed that all 3 of these are so interlinked that there's so much intersection that we might as well just have it as one circle and call it One Welfare.
I think you using the word holistic really sort of sums up the concept. Do you have any examples of anybody who started to use the One Welfare concept in their work now?
Yes, there's a lot of people that are using the One Welfare. It started out more as a One Health, and there were people using One Welfare in their work, but maybe not using that term. So there is one group in the UK, and it is led by veterinarian Dr. Rebecca Garcia Pinillos. So she has brought a number of people together to collaborate and brainstorm, and they came up with this great book called One Welfare, a framework to improve animal health and animal welfare and human well-being. And so they do workshops and projects, and the whole idea behind this book is to generate collaborative ideas where all sorts of different groups and agencies really need to work together, because we're talking about one welfare. So we're talking about humans, animals, environment. This is bringing so many different disciplines together.
I think it's really interesting, the concept of collaboration, when we're talking, as you mentioned in particular, about bringing together the sort of animal side of things, the environmental side. I think that would, of course, naturally bring together a variety of groups to come in and have this sort of One Welfare concept.
That's right, Callie. And what they came up with was various graphics that would sort of capture this idea and how all of these things are so interconnected. So there was this one graphic where they have the 3 different areas sort of in the center of the circle, and then the outer circle has various topics like One Health, global health, human-animal bond, all around the outside of the circle. So, if we're thinking, for instance, One Health, we can think all those different areas are affected, because we can think of one example like antibiotic resistance. And so with antibiotics being used in large numbers to save people and also animals, but they're overused. They're also, in some countries, they're dumped into the water through the pharmaceutical process. And so they're creating antibiotic-resistant microbes in the environment, and those can end up in our medical systems or in our environment, affecting humans and animals, and then you don't have any antibiotics that can actually get rid of these infections. So that's kind of a disastrous example of how the whole One Welfare comes into play.
Interesting.
Okay. Then there was another graphic that they put together where they recognized that all 3 really should be just represented as the center of the circle, One Welfare. So it's just all one. And then they had these various topics sort of going around, and you can sort of turn the outer circle around no matter where, because all of it's encompassed in that One Welfare center. So if we look at one of the categories on that one particular graphic, that's the one welfare, it talks about the connections between human and animal abuse and neglect. And if you think of the example of dog fighting, clearly that's abuse of animals, and it usually involves drug trafficking and gun running, so it's usually abuse towards humans as well. And you don't normally associate folks that are involved in those activities as being sort of focused on a healthy environment and that kind of thing. So that is sort of one very global example of a one welfare concept.
So we just finished chatting about the sort of connection between human and animal abuse. Do you have any other connections of one welfare?
Yes, I have a lot of examples. There are so many. One of them that springs to mind right now is the idea of food security and food safety and the environment. And so if I give an example, for instance, of avian influenza, right? That's an example of a virus that started with wildlife, and it basically mutates and creates influenza viruses that can affect human beings or other animals. Yeah. So we had this avian influenza that mutated and was able to infect pigs, for instance. And so then we ended up with swine flu, which then mutated again to be able to infect human beings, right?
Wow.
So then if we look at just avian influenza itself coming into, for one example, into the US a few years ago, it basically caused a decimation of so many flocks. It's so deadly that what we need to do then as a choice is to depopulate whole flocks of birds in order to stop that from spreading. So, which is a really unfortunate state of affairs, but the influenza, when it is that pathogenic, can be that devastating. And so basically it created ghost towns in some areas of the states because they had to depopulate so many of the birds that it affected all the different industries that would be associated with that. So packing, slaughterhouses, trucking, transport. So a lot of people lost their livelihood, their jobs, their communities. So something like that is really devastating. It's in the environment, in the wildlife, then it affects the food safety and security. The economy is affected. The birds were depopulated, and therefore the price went up of poultry products. And then it affected people's livelihoods as well. And then, of course, if it does mutate to people, that's always another possibility with that particular virus.
With these types of examples, it becomes very evident to see just how this wheel makes sense as one wheel because they are so interconnected.
Absolutely, Callie. Another example, and there are a few examples of this type of thing where people clear cut and they start to encroach on the environment. They're getting closer to the forest. So one example in Sudan, for instance, is that clear cutting of the trees, there's less birds. So they're not eating their prey, which is cockroaches. So the cockroaches are multiplying in huge numbers, and we have massive cockroach-induced asthma incidents.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that's definitely, all three areas are very closely interconnected. And that's because of humans encroaching on an environment that wasn't normally theirs. Kyasanur forest disease in India, same type of thing. Folks clear cutting or living closer to the forest, living in the forest or going into the forest for wood or whatever it is that they're doing in the forest. And so the Kyasanur forest disease virus is one that usually affects monkeys, and it's tick-borne. So now I'm in the forest and I'm prey, and so then I can get affected by that particular disease. Very nasty. There is a vaccine for it, fortunately, but still it is a devastating disease as well. And in Brazil, same type of thing. So clear cutting, encroaching on the forest. Now we've got yellow fever in the monkeys. we're in the forest, and the yellow fever can affect us via the mosquito vector. And so the really nasty outcome of that was people got scared and they started killing the monkeys. So the monkeys were being decimated both by yellow fever as well as people attacking and killing them out of fear and lack of knowledge and awareness. So again, it's our encroaching. It's like we're usually at the center of that wheel because of our activities. We're affecting all of these different areas, our own health, human health, and environmental well-being as well.
So it's easy to see how this is so much more than just a North American issue, which sometimes we tend to sort of close our minds to, but it really is global.
Yes, it is. It's global, and it really does bring all three areas together in some really graphic examples. Another one in the news, for instance, and a lot lately, but over the last number of years, is the concept of all the meat that we're eating and how much of a sort of a carbon footprint that takes up. And so I was just thinking about that, you know, if we have factory farming or this big productions of farming, so now you have a whole ton of cattle all stuck together in this one area, and there's just massive amounts of manure being produced. There's also the off gases of the cattle, so that's greenhouse gases, but with the manure there's so much, and there's something that we call nutrient management. So a nutrient management program where you take those nutrients, which is the manure, and you use calculations in order to figure out how to use it, how to spread it properly so that you're not putting too much out on the field, but you're putting enough to support your crops. If there are mistakes, if people put it out too soon when the ground hasn't thawed out enough, or it just is just run off because there's rains or whatever. So we end up with these nutrients in the water, and it's called over-nutrification. We've got too much nutrient in the water. So it goes in the streams, the lakes, eventually the oceans, and this is a perfect nutrient perfect nutrient source for harmful algal blooms. So with harmful algal blooms, you can have anything from somebody's golden retriever going and swimming and then getting toxic, poisoned from the harmful algal blooms in the lake, or you have it off in the ocean. And just recently, yesterday actually, I was reading about sea lions again, sea lions dying or getting really, really sick from domoic acid, which is something given off through these harmful algal blooms being processed by the usual prey. And so these sea lions are ingesting their prey with the domoic acid, and that's affecting them with horrible neurological issues and death. And so that's an example of how my choice at the beginning of I'm going to support this type of production, I have to be able to connect that that's the outcome, right? That I'm connected to that somehow, and that we really do need to find ourselves thinking in that center of the circle and embody that one welfare concept and model it for people around us, family, friends, especially the children. So that we really recognize we're at that center, and every choice we make has a consequence, right? And so that way we might start to become more empathic and change our thoughts and our practices, and especially with the kids, because they're the leaders of our future, right?
So let's talk about the future a little bit. How can we start to work in the concept of One Welfare into our future endeavors?
Well, Callie, so one way is that we actually connect with these diagrams that we put ourselves. It's all nice to look at beautiful diagrams. And so, for example, we have this one working group that had a conference, and out of that came this incredible graphic that showed all these different interconnections with all of these different areas that we just spoke about. And so if in this moment I just highlight the one piece that's at the very bottom of this graphic, talks about people's attitudes, right? So our attitudes towards all of this. So if we put ourselves in that center and we recognize that that it's our activities that are doing this, that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about humane education. And so humane education isn't necessarily just for kids, it's for everybody. We all need to become more aware of what our role is in all of these activities and how they are all interconnected. But more specifically with our programs, we are developing, well, for one thing, we've developed this program called Animal Smart. What that program does is it brings these ideas into the schools. So again, the children are our future leaders, and so they're the ones that we want. They're already connected more than adults are. They're already curious. So let's foster that and let's take advantage of that and let's keep that curiosity going right into their adulthood. And that way we stay curious and learn more about all these interconnections and realize just how closely we're connected to all the different happenings in the world. And I do mean world, not just in our own neighborhood, of course. So what this does really is it presents an invitation, right? It's an invitation to embody this one welfare concept and recognize that every time we make choices, there are consequences. So again, if I'm eating meat and I'm supporting those kinds of factory farming type of environments, then I'm potentially having an effect on someone's golden retriever friend in another state or a sea lion in the ocean, right? There are consequences. And so what we hope with our program is that the outcome, and it's an ongoing outcome that we continue to foster, is having empathy for our fellow humans, regardless of what their circumstances are, empathy for the fellow creatures that we live on this planet with, and empathy for the earth itself. It's not an inexhaustible resource, and we have to acknowledge and live with that. The bottom line, after looking at all these graphics, these circles and things, is that we have to recognize that we're at the center of all of that, and at the center of all of that, there really is only one heart beating.